Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to all our distinguished panelists and the chair. Before I hand the session over to Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, which is, of course, France and Japan shape new roles in world affairs, enhancing strategic ties with India, I'm going to just take a few minutes to introduce the chair. Ambassador Sujan Chinoy is the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi. A career diplomat from 1981 to 2018, he was India's ambassador to Japan and Mexico and High Commissioner of India to Belize and the Republic of the Marshall Islands. A fluent Mandarin speaker with 19 years of specialization on China, he headed the Indian expert group dealing with the boundary dispute and confidence-building measures. During his foreign service career, he was also the Deputy Chief of Mission in Saudi Arabia and Consul General of India in Shanghai and Sydney, besides serving in Hong Kong and Beijing. He was India's representative to the First Committee at the UN from 1992 to 1995, dealing with disarmament and international security. On deputation to India's National Security Council Secretariat, he anchored policy issues and strategic dialogues with counterpart organizations around the world. He has rich experience in dealing with security challenges in India's extended neighborhood, terrorism and extremism, maritime security, defense reforms and modernization, infrastructure and connectivity. Ambassador Chinoy contributes extensively to newspapers and journals, besides lecturing in India and overseas. He's also the honorary patron of the Indo-Japan Friendship Association, Retd chapter. A polyglot, he speaks several foreign languages, including Japanese, French, German, and Spanish. A very, very warm welcome again. Ambassador Chinoy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lawale. A very good afternoon to all participants, and particularly a very warm welcome to my co-speakers, the two distinguished speakers for this afternoon, Ambassador Mohan Kumar and Professor Srabani Choudhury. I really am grateful to you for the good things that you said about me. All the more so when one is extinguished, one likes to hear all the things that one did in one's career. So thank you for reminding me as well. Now, this afternoon, I am particularly grateful to the administration of leadership of Symbiosis for having invited me to chair the afternoon session 4 on France and Japan, shaping new roles in world affairs, enhancing strategic ties with India. I think it's not usual that you'll have the chair also doubling up as a speaker, but then, you know, this is an occasion for me to play a double role because we were one short as far as speakers go, and therefore I have chipped in. Ambassador Mohan Kumar will speak about Indo-French relations. I will introduce him a little later. Professor Srabani Choudhury will speak about India-Japan relations, and since the both of them have extraordinary expertise on economic matters, I will try to chip in the third presentation on the Indo-Pacific with some strategic observations as well. We have a total of 1 hour and 15 minutes at our disposal. And after I have finished my opening remarks, I will request each of the distinguished speakers to confine themselves to 15 minutes. And thereafter, we will hopefully have 20 minutes left for interaction, a Q&A session, which I shall administer and moderate through the chat box. I request all participants to send in their questions in brief in the chat box. Let me begin with a few opening remarks in order to frame the discourse for us this afternoon. As you all know, the world is in a state of great flux, but as we see it, and as I see it in particular, there are two major disruptions. There has been the rise of China, which has played a very big role in upending the equilibrium, the strategic and economic equilibrium around the world, including in our region, for about at least a decade now, if not two. And then there is the pandemic, which has struck us over the last 1 year. China's rise, if I can just frame it, there were three phases. The first phase from 1949 to 1979 was one of political and territorial consolidation, but also extraordinarily chaotic internally in terms of the great proletariat cultural revolution and a lot of internal dissent as well. The second phase from 1979 to 2009 was the one with the Midas touch. Everything that China did, particularly after its entry into the WTO, was kind of leading to greater success. And that phase ended with the West in relative decline, with the debilitating impact of the two global financial and economic crises, from which China emerged relatively unscathed. And we are now, therefore, in the third phase of China's rise, in which China's not only doing very well, relatively speaking, through the pandemic, but is also closing the gap with the lead economy in the world, that is the United States, faster than expected. By 2027, China will, by all reckoning, outdo the US economy, at least in terms of total GDP. And it is also looking to achieve partial modernization by 2035 and full modernization by 2050. So therefore, there is this discourse today about the changes that have taken place in the Asian economic architecture and the Asian security architecture. Overall, we have seen that there's been good economic progress over the last 2 decades, at least until the pandemic struck, with high military expenditures accompanying economic growth throughout Asia. At the same time, there are historical disputes throughout this region, which are also rapidly resurfacing, and we have seen some of that on our own doorstep in the Himalayas. The one thing that strikes me amidst all this is that India is absent from the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. For that matter, it is also absent from the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and it has long been absent from APEC as well. China, on the other hand, is everywhere, including in the ASEAN. It's the one that's conducting the code of conduct with ASEAN countries. And of course, it has its sort of tentacles spread in the South China Sea and the East China Sea as well. China happens to be in the lead in the RCEP, and it also has, ironically, massive economic engagement with members of the Quad, not just the United States, but also Japan, Australia, and India, with supply chain or market leverage to boot. Security in our region is fractured. ASEAN is divided. In the Indian Ocean, particularly in the Western Indian Ocean, the Indian Ocean Rim Association and the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium are contributing to building some kind of a consensus, but they are not truly representative. France is a member of both, Japan of neither, though it is a dialogue partner of the IORA and observer at the IONS. To my mind, the East Asia Summit process is perhaps the only suprastructure with the greatest participation possible. That is the ASEAN 10 plus 6 plus Russia and China and the United States as well, all in all 18. But France is missing. Anyway, it cannot really build any real consensus, that is to say the East Asia Summit, with China and Russia doing a tandem there. So the world today, as well as the Indo-Pacific, are grappling with tensions over several T's, as I call them. That is, disputes over trade, tensions over territory. There is the abiding threat of terrorism. There is this new scrimmage over technology and 5G, and above all, tenets, as in the narrative, the sort of jostling that's going on for proving one's own narrative right. And I think the pandemic notwithstanding, the chances are that India will recover and play a bigger role in the future. Now, very quickly, I want to, for the two speakers, point out that for Japan and for France, both strategic partners of India, we can possibly plug in at different points. Japan, for instance, on coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure, it's one of the lead players there. With France, we have done the International Solar Alliance. As far as arms exports are concerned, Japan is not much of a player. Only a small fraction of its production is earmarked for exports. The rest is all for domestic consumption. The US too, aircraft sale is on the back burner, but we do have joint projects today on unmanned ground vehicles and robotics between the DRDO and ATLA. France, on the other hand, is a hyper-military power. It exports a great deal of weapons, and as far as our Air Force is concerned, we have seen their presence in terms of the Dassault Tufani aircraft in the past, the Mystères, the Mirage, and now finally the Rafale. Both of them have a certain presence in the region. For instance, Japan, except for Djibouti, doesn't have any territorial presence or military bases outside Japan. France, on the other hand, has 7 territories, 1.6 million French citizens, several hundreds of thousands of expatriates, and possibly the world's largest EEZ in our region in the Indo-Pacific. But it comes with a certain historical baggage. Its presence in Mayotte, for instance, is protested by Comoros. Mauritius and Madagascar are disputing its presence in the Tromelin Island and the Scattered Islands. Japan has its own baggage. Japan has good relations with both India and Pakistan. Its colonial footprint did not extend to South Asia, though they very nearly made it to our northeast at the end of the Second World War. But they have a record of working together with Pakistan in the past. France has faced huge problems recently in Pakistan with radical elements in Pakistan belonging to the Tehreek-e-Labaik Pakistan, baying for the blood of the French ambassador and seeking his expulsion over the Charlie Hebdo cartoons, etc., that controversy. So in terms of relations with China, both have mixed records. Japan's record is one of tensions, both before and after the formation of the People's Republic of China. Japan defeated China in 1895, leading to the loss of Taiwan and influence in the Korean Peninsula. Its wartime occupation in the 1930s and 1940s is still regarded as a very bitter memory by the Chinese. Japan totally avoids citing human rights violations in China. On the other hand, France, as a colonial power, has obtained similar benefits as the UK since the 19th century through the Treaty of Whampoa. Its takeover of what is now known as French Indochina, then known as Annam, in 1884-85 also led to a loss of territory and influence for China. And both Japan and France, mind you, if I could remind you, were part of the 8-nation expeditionary force that went into Peking and raised once again the Summer Palace during the Boxer revolution, the Boxer uprising. Japan, on the other hand, has no problems with regard to an Islamic population or terrorism or radicalization. France, on the other hand, has a huge problem with all this. And of course, it is one of the lead players in the FATF, which is headquartered through the OECD in Paris. As a member of the UN Security Council, France is a very, very big player, and Japan and India are aspiring to be members. In the Indo-Pacific, we can work with both. Both have their own Indo-Pacific strategies. Abe's FOIP is well known. Macron's Indo-Pacific strategy unveiled in 2018 is also well known. France, of course, is not a member of the Quad, but it has been holding exercises with the Quad and bilaterally with us and trilaterally with others as well. So we have this a very good frame of reference in which India seeks to work with both Japan and France in this region. Both of them are big powers in their own way. Japan more particularly on the economic front, not necessarily on the military front. And with these few words, I would now like to invite our speakers to deliver their address. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, our first speaker, is a professor of diplomatic practice at the Jindal School of International Affairs. And he has had an extraordinary career in the Indian Foreign Service over 36 years. He was our ambassador in France. He was actively involved in climate change negotiations. He's also very familiar with the Gulf region. More than that, he's been our lead negotiator at GATT and at all WTO panels as well. Currently, he's chairman of RIS, and he's again a prolific writer and speaker. So may I at this stage request Ambassador Mohan Kumar to take the floor and to deliver his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Sujan. It's a great pleasure to have you in the chair and moderate this session. It's a pleasure to participate. I want to thank Symbiosis for this opportunity. I just wanted to make a series of propositions, if you like, just to provoke a debate, because you've done such a masterly tour d'horizon of both France and Japan that I find myself unable to add meaningfully to what you have already said. But perhaps some snippets, at least from the time that I spent in Paris, both as DCM and as ambassador. So the first thing that I want to say about Franco-Indian relationship, and I will chip in towards the end of my presentation on Indo-Pacific, is that this is a strategic partnership, to the best of my knowledge, which is free of any contentious issues. So France, with France, we really have no big contentious issues. It's always, the challenge is to take it to the next level. That really is the challenge when it comes to strategic partnership with France. Having said that, I will acknowledge that trade and investment is arguably the weakest pillar. And my standard joke to my Parisian friends was that India trades slightly more with Bangladesh than it does with France, which is factually correct. So that used to, of course, kind of make my point to them that this is an area where the relationship is underperforming, and it has been underperforming for years. And there are structural reasons for it. But other than that, this is a relationship that is largely problem-free. And I must also add, now that we are doing a post-mortem and I'm a professor and I'm at liberty to speak my mind, etc., that during the period of Donald Trump, it is France which took the lead for India in the UN Security Council. It's not United States or any other power. It was France. On most issues, like the membership of the Missile Technology Control Regime, the listing of terrorists, on all these issues in the UN Security Council, France was of immeasurable assistance to India. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is that, which I'm always fond of saying, there is a French white paper on foreign policy and national security strategy. And since I am familiar with the French language, I would tell my French friends that since India does not bring out a white paper, the best thing for me to do would be to replace France with India and to replace the French language with English. And this could well be an Indian white paper, because the paper was littered with strategic autonomy and such concepts which Indians are very, very familiar. The only power which has issued a defense strategy for Indo-Pacific 2020, which clearly says we are privileging a defense partnership with India in order to guarantee strategic autonomy for both countries. I've never seen a statement like this from any other country. This is something spelled out in an official French document on Indo-Pacific. Thirdly, the tripod that Indian ambassadors in France normally cope when they talk of Franco-Indian relationship is, one is defense, obviously, and Rafale comes to mind, but there are lots of other parts of the relationship that the chairman mentioned. So the defense partnership is very strong. There, my only point would be the era of buyer-seller relationship is over. And I think the French are aware of this because their equipment is expensive. It's the best in the world, but it's expensive. And we have to move to investor relationship. They simply have to make these things in India. So I think the French are aware of this, but that is the challenge in the defense relationship. The second is space. I mentioned the tripod. The first leg is defense. The second leg is space. And here we have a long-standing relationship between ISRO and what in a French acronym is called CNES, C-N-E-S. And they have a long-standing cooperation. The relationship has been contemporarized because we are in the process of making a joint satellite which will trace the maritime domain awareness in the Indian Ocean. So this is the kind of cooperation that ISRO is doing with CNES, with France. So the space relationship is very important. The last part of the tripod is nuclear energy. And there I would say that we are in the process of building the largest nuclear park in the world in Jaitapur. But that has run into some issues, mainly of finance, mainly of trying to transfer technology and so on. So hopefully that will come about as well. I would also say that one of the first things that an Indian ambassador is told when he goes to France is that in 1998, when the whole world declared India a pariah, the only country which expressed some comfort to us was France. Every other country pretty much labeled us as an untouchable. So France with Jacques Chirac was the only country which said, we understand why you're going nuclear. So the first strategic partnership at a time when no other country was willing to send even foreign office officials to Delhi was France. So such things should not be forgotten, because by and large, this has been a friend which has stood by us through thick and thin. So what's the future? The future, I would say, would be governed by three big issues for me. One was mentioned by Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, chairman, that is International Solar Alliance and climate change. They've got some amazing green technology, which should be acquired by us, hopefully at a reasonable cost. And France understands that if you want to win the battle against climate change, you simply have to win it in India. And this is something that I think France is aware of. So climate change is an area where not just the International Solar Alliance, which I'm seeing is going from strength to strength, but also I think green technology is something that we should get from France. The second big issue, urban management, smart cities. And this is an area where France has excellent technology as well, especially in areas like waste management. Some of the best firms in the world are French. Veolia, for example, comes to mind, but there are others. So this is an area, again, which is also part of sustainable development. But I'm talking of urban management, city management, smart cities, where I think France's help can be taken. I'm including metro, rail, and so on and so forth in this particular. The last part of my intervention, and I'm going to keep it short, is Indo-Pacific. So my own assessment of the Indo-Pacific is that the Quad is heavily focused on the Pacific and less on the Indian Ocean. This is my understanding, especially because of the heavyweights, Japan and United States. So Australia, of course, takes care of the Pacific, but it is also part of Indian Ocean. It is my contention, therefore, that India needs to build a separate hub and spoke arrangement for Indian Ocean, particularly in the light of China's announcement that Northern Indian Ocean is part of their core interest. China has now said that the entire sea lane of communication in that area, which crosses through Northern Indian Ocean, is a core interest because 80% of their energy requirements use that route. We've also seen Chinese permanent presence, which began in 2008, strengthening itself. So the Indian Ocean has become crowded. This is where I think people should realize, and the chairman hinted at that, which is France is very much a resident Indian Ocean power, not just because of Reunion and Mayotte, but also in the Pacific, Nouvelle Caledonia, what they call New Caledonia, and French Polynesia. Out of 11 million square kilometers of exclusive economic zone, 9 million is in Indian Ocean for France. So France is very much a resident Indian Ocean power, and we should really be cooperating with France to strengthen this particular leg of the Indo-Pacific, because I see a fundamental imbalance between the Pacific part of the Indo-Pacific and the Indian part of the Indo-Pacific. We need to develop those. And I myself believe at some point, if you think West Asia, and I see Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad listening, so I'd like to know his opinion. I feel, for example, that Israel should be co-opted as well for the Indian part of the Indo-Pacific. There is no harm. If you can think of UAE, if you can think of Saudi Arabia, why not Israel? So I would say that our efforts should be, and I'm happy that India, Australia, France is also working as a trilateral. That's very good, because that strengthens the. So what is it that India will have to do in Indian Ocean? At the end of the day, it is all about area denial, access denial and area control, frankly. It's all about AA, double D. At the end of the day, this is being done not just in your waters, but also in international waters. And this is what we should be really doing. The problem with Indo-Pacific is, and I will conclude after making these three propositions which the Indo-Pacific has to handle. One particular problem is, I think, that we keep saying it should be free, open, and inclusive. I do not see how it can be inclusive if you say that you want only countries which subscribe to democratic values, because it automatically rules out at least one country which doesn't subscribe to democratic values. So why not be open about it? Why should we say inclusive? I'm just trying to provoke a debate since I see a lot of students. So why say inclusive when you have things like subscription to democratic values, peaceful resolution of disputes, and not changing the status quo? We at least know that one country is changing the status quo in South China Sea and East China Sea. So that is the first. The second is ASEAN centrality, to which again I'm grateful to the chairman because he hinted at this in his initial remarks. ASEAN will be the last entity on earth to choose between US and China. They will not be the first. You can be absolutely sure about it. They will postpone this day as much as possible because frankly, they're having best of both the worlds. Let's be honest. So they are not going to make the choice. So we will have to decide what we expect from ASEAN. So repeating the mantra ASEAN centrality is, again, I put it up for discussion. By the way, I'm not disagreeing with anything that is being said. What I'm saying is we need to discuss these issues in order that we can be clear in our minds what kind of an Indo-Pacific strategy we are looking for. So I really do believe that, frankly, Indo-Pacific will be asked to grapple with some of these issues, and it's not going to be easy. The chairman was absolutely right, and since I have a bit of expertise in trade as well, he's absolutely right. We are not part of the CPTPP, we are not part of RCEP. We are also not proposing to sign any FTAs to the east of India. It's ironical that all the FTAs signed by India are to the east of India. We haven't signed a single FTA to the west. All the FTAs that India has signed is with Japan, Korea, ASEAN, Singapore, etc. And we have not been very happy with the record, frankly, for whatever reasons. I don't want to get into it. So henceforth, we are going to be looking west, to the best of my knowledge. We are looking at signing an FTA with UK. We are trying to see how we can commence talks with EU, and we are trying to see what we can do with United States. So there is no more looking east or acting east when it comes to FTAs. So this brings me to a very interesting situation where India has decided that its economic future is tied to the West. It will continue to trade with ASEAN and China. That's fine. We will do it to the extent necessary and extent possible. But ultimately, our goal to become a 5 trillion economy will mean doubling of exports. Doubling of exports can only happen with the Gulf, where you have $100 billion trade. United States, you have $100 billion trade. EU, you have $100 billion trade. I am excluding ASEAN and China, with which also we have 100 billions roughly. But it's very clear to me that it is becoming impossible for us to export to these two places. I mean, there are a variety of reasons for it. This is not the seminar or webinar in which to go into it, but we have tried hard. And I think the time has come when we accept we cannot export to ASEAN, we cannot export to China. Whether it is non-tariff barriers, whether it is our lack of competitiveness is immaterial. We have decided if we have to double our exports, we have to look to the West. In which case, I also think Indo-Pacific becomes important because it then becomes for us a concept which is rooted in security, especially maritime security. It can be rooted in climate change. It can be rooted in disaster resistance. It can be rooted in anti-piracy. But whether it can really be rooted in ordinary trade and investment, I'm less sure, at least from India's perspective. So let me close on that enigmatic note. And once again, Sujan, thank you very much for your opening remarks. It's made my job easy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. You have actually given us in a nutshell a great deal of detail, and you've also clarified a number of concepts. And I cannot agree with you more that this relationship with France, by the way, like the relationship with Japan, has up until now been underperforming. So that's another common point between the two of them vis-a-vis India. Also that it's free of contentious issues. So is the case with Japan. As for strategic autonomy, you are aware that from the time of de Gaulle, even the Americans had realized the kind of strategic autonomy that France exercised in dealing with transatlantic issues. So that is something that is built into their DNA. We can use that to our advantage as we seek more than one partner for our future. I will cover some of the Indo-Pacific issues in my second incarnation as a speaker. But at this stage, suffice it to say that you have also in a way laid the ground for the next speaker by referring to smart cities and France's involvement. Again, Japan is also heavily involved in that. And both France and Japan have something else in common, which is high-speed rail. As you know, France has train de grande vitesse, the TGV, which is also something that India could look at in terms of modernization of its railways. So at this point, let me bring in our very eminent second speaker to take up from here on. Dr. Srabani Roy Choudhury is a professor in Japanese Studies, Center Chairperson at the Center for East Asian Studies, the School of International Studies, JNU. She's an alumnus of JNU and recipient of a grant scholarship of the Japan Foundation for her PhD. And she's been working mainly on economic issues. She's published widely in national and international journals. She has also explored the experience of Japanese multinationals in India, their entry strategies and their survival techniques. So she comes with this formidable scholarship and expertise on Japan, and we couldn't have found a better speaker this afternoon on India-Japan relations. Over to you. Next 15 minutes, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Chinoy, and thank you, Symbiosis, for giving me this opportunity. It's indeed a pleasure to be with people who are basically being practitioners and have contributed to the policy making of India. We, as an observant of India-Japan relations, in my case, we've generally been more indulging ourselves in understanding the narratives that come from the country that we study, that is, for me, Japan. I would like to therefore bring in some amount of in my discussion, some amount of narratives that have often come into the picture when Japan has looked towards India for its relationship. Historically, of course, the first and more important thing that is always put forward is that Japan-India did not have any historical baggages, and Japan therefore could, post Second World War, as both the countries, came out of each one with their own set of issues of post-war recovery for Japan and out of colonialism for India, that Japan had experience of friendship with India. And we know that India was one of the first country to recognize Japan. And we had a certain amount of relationship going between both the countries when Prime Minister Kishi visited, and then subsequently the Crown Prince Akihito, who was later had also come back to our country as an emperor. However, what is very important is during these times, while we had visits happening between our premiers, we did not really engage ourselves in any kind of economic or political ventures, simply probably because each of these countries had different notions in mind. Japan being weighed down by its constitution and therefore for a long while decided to be a very dominant strategic player, relying on their alliance with US. And over a period of time, as it grew economically, it would use restrict book diplomacy to make its presence felt at various points of time, as and when the US required it to do. It is only in the recent past that we can see that most of the active and diplomatically adventurous nation is Japan today, who is pursuing a relationship it needs to secure for the future of its free and open Indo-Pacific. Why is this change in Japan? It is essentially because, I would like to say that it is essentially because of two important criteria that always has been the reasons for Japan to push for any kind of relationships. And therefore, this time, because of recessions of USA and rising China, this is one thing, that narration that has been constantly brought into discussion. However, it is important to remember that Japan's basic national interest has always been to guard its economic vulnerabilities as resource-poor island nations, which is basically, therefore, a constraint which has encouraged Japan to look for resources, for post its use of domestic market, its own outside markets, and of course, in current days, of resources that have changed from being just nominal resources to the technological resources, as I would like to bring into the picture later. Of course, currently it has its own share of security worries and is no less than any other nations, not only with China, but it also has an issue with North Korea, a very maverick country which has huge nuclear claims, and also with Russia, which has unsolved northern territorial issues with Japan. But of course, as of today, the main source of strategic anxiety for Japan is China, and China's bid to dominate East Asia and broader maritime region is become the main concern on which Japan obviously plays a much more strong-footed race with respect to whether it is Quad or with any other kind of international forums. If we look at Japan's current venturing into this whole issue of how to reposition itself away from USA, India has become one of the countries through which it has tried to reposition itself. For Japan, India is a very important nation today. But if you look at Japan's historically, we have been an important nation to them post mainly the 2000, that is the post 20, in the beginning of the 21st century. Previous to that, we've had a good relations, but it had had certain downfalls because of one particular reason, and that has been the nuclear issue. Japan, having had faced a nuclear disaster with respect to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, has a strong nuclear allergy. And each point of time that we've had a nuclear testing, that is 1974 and 1998, we have always had Japan, which has been the first country to make issues. And even if we look at the current, post-nuclear testing, the nuclear civil deal that we inked with USA and Japan, Japan had been very non-committal because we do not have the non-proliferation treaty in place. We have not been a signatory to it. And therefore, Japan has had issues with us. We must always remember that Japan's relationship with any country would have an issue if, with respect to the nuclear. And post Fukushima, it has become much more critical for Japan because it feels that it has not only faced man-made disaster, it's also faced natural disaster with respect to nuclear issues. However, given all these background, it is important for us to understand that in the current period of time, when Japan looked towards India, it was started off as a global economic partnership between India and Japan globally, and it rested on the economic angle, and it rested on the comparative advantage that Japan sought from India with respect to finding one, the consumers, that is a huge demand market, two, the skilled and unskilled workers, which is why I say skilled and unskilled. Most people try to essentially talk about us being a very, largely unskilled, low-cost economy, but we are in a position today because of our very well-educated science stream or the STEM community. We are also very important resource for Japan with respect to research and with respect to industries like pharma. And it is in these set of sectors that Japan tried to initially initiate its presence through private investments. And as we progress through the 20s, you would realize that there has been certain changes that has come over with respect to Japan looking keenly at India. The entire process of gaining entry economically was also subjected to a presence of Japan finding a trust with respect to India, and in turn, India becoming more trustful with respect to Japan. And therefore, in 2005, when Koizumi visited India, he came up with what he called the 8 key areas of interaction that Japan and India would have. If you today look at any kind of joint ventures, joint statement that comes across whenever we have a summit meeting between our premiers, you would realize that these are the 8 on which we can generally club the summit meets. One is an enhanced and upgraded dialogue with respect to architecturing the entire India-Japan relations, comprehensive economic engagement, enhanced security dialogue and cooperation, science technology initiatives, culture academic initiatives, cooperation in ushering in the new Asian era, and of course, cooperation in the United Nations. If we keep this particular set of points in mind, you would realize that we have actually taken forward our relationship on these pillars. With respect to enhanced and upgradation of dialogue in the security architecture, though it has happened mainly under the Abe's regime, and his first statement in our Indian Parliament with respect to confluence of the 2 Cs, we would see that today our security engagements have 2+2 dialogue among the ministerial level, plethora of areas with respect to Malabar exercises or many other bilateral and trilateral maritime exercises that happens between India and Japan. We have also had a desk for Japan with respect to its investments in our Prime Minister's office. So we have generally created a large kind of architectures. I'll come to the fact of how we moved into the regional architectures also in the last concluding remarks. We also have comprehensively built our economic engagement. And today, this engagement of economic engagement is not only shouldered by the private investment or FDI, but we have strong presence of ODA. We are the largest recipient of ODA, and this ODA is all today concentrated on infrastructure building, on smart city building, on, you see the DMIC, you see the metro system, and of course the high-speed railways at Shinkansen thing, in which, of course, France, as you just heard, is also a very strong candidate on which we could also probably rely on in the future. But what is important is how this economic engagement between these two countries have taken a strategic move. Today's Japan's, in the last few years, have concentrated on taking this economic engagement into the northeast area region of our country, which is essentially going to become a conduit if we are going to look at, because it is not only comes under our neighborhood first policy, it also comes under our seeking out and integrating Northeast Asia, Northeast India into our thing, and also into our own community, and also, for more importantly for Japan, it is also a conduit for its free and open Indo-Pacific. So given this, there is a strong strategic component involved when Japan engages itself in Northeast Asia, Northeast India. We also see Japan, which is an important thing to understand, that it has made its presence felt in Andaman Nicobar Island currently with a solar panel project. And this, we must realize, is very, very critical, because after all, for India, Andaman Nicobar Island is strategically positioned, and we have a strong interest in keeping Andaman Nicobar Islands with our own structure. With science and technology initiative, we've done an extremely well in our between the two countries. We have engaged ourselves with variety of other technological upbuilding of our country. But more importantly, right now, post-pandemic, the new areas of technology of AI, 5G, and other directions with respect to green technology is where Japan and India, even in the current telephonic dialogue between the two prime ministers, it was under discussion. So the interest in science and technology, the kind of soft power that we have, would definitely be something that Japan would be keen to cooperate with, and therefore it could have a strong areas of cooperation in the near future. If you look at our essential move that we've made in this India-Japan relations, you would realize what we say, from a very economic orientation, it has become a very strategic oriented relationship. But nevertheless, economics would obviously be one of the strong pillars on which Japan would always engage with India, because Japan, as a capital-rich country, would obviously look towards India as making use of its capital in a more productive fashion. But if you look at the last 1 year, apart from economic help that we've got because of the crisis response, and even today, on 30th today, Japan has given us 300 oxygen converters as well as ventilators. We have also had strong strategic discussions, the 2+2 ministerial discussion, the Quad Plus consultation early on in March, followed by our own foreign minister, Dr. Jaishankar, visiting, being in discussion with his counterpart in Japan, the Motegi-san. We also had the Malabar exercise, where we invited also Australia, and the mine warfare exercise that India and Japan and USA engaged in. Current discussions on supply chain reliance, on which we have generally been keen to use, and we've got unfortunately only been able to get only very minuscule part of the investments that has come out of from Japan in the process of them moving into decoupling from China. However, with startups, we've been much more. Engagements have happened much more with the startup, and we presume that this is going to be one area that in future would see some light with respect to 5G technological uses also. However, if I were to conclude, I would like to again go back to what has become primarily a Quad question these days. With respect to Quad, as my previous speaker said, even I am very concerned that it is very Pacific oriented, and that it needs to become an Indo or Indian Ocean orientation needs to be. And I am of a mode that probably Quad will no longer actually be Quad. It might move into Quad Plus and have certain other names. With respect to the issue of, India working itself within the economic architecture that the ASEAN and the more or less what we say the Asia Pacific has put forward within the Indo-Pacific, that is the RCEP and the CPTPP. CPTPP is a gold standard at the moment, and it is something where we need to get invited into. But RCEP has been a very unfortunate thing, having worked for 8 years and negotiated, that we have stepped away. But my my concern today for India is having lost out with RCEP and not being part of CPTPP. If we are looking west for an economic engagement more and more, but we are looking at investments from the Eastern world, then probably we would be, having to create a multilateral way of moving around with respect to the economic concerns that is going to be emerging with us. So trade with with the West and investment from the East would probably be a questionable engagement for India, and we might be therefore probably be pulled through Japan into the RCEP in future, because Japan is very keen to have RCEP membership of India, not because of only that India is a large consumer base, etc., but more so for India. It's a Japan and India have strategic concern of being able to maintain the democratic or the liberal order within the economic architecture within the Asia Pacific. I think with this, I would like to conclude my remarks, and I look forward to more questions. Thank you, Chair, again for hosting me, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Srabani Roy Choudhury, for having given us a very good overview of our relations with Japan. I'll be remiss in my role as chair if I were not to comment very briefly on a couple of points that you made. Let me begin with the last one, decoupling. Of 59 Japanese companies that relocated, they prefer to use the word relocation, that relocated out of China, for instance, roughly 37 went to Southeast Asia and only 2 came to India. So this partnership that we have with Japan should never be taken for granted. We will have to do the grunt work in order to ensure that we have the right kind of economic policies and docking points for the Japanese to come and be convinced that their future lies with India. The Northeast is very important by way of a connect between us. We have an Act East forum between us, but I think the major artery there, that is Myanmar, has for the moment been severed. And therefore, it'll be a while before we can actually reconnect with Japan in terms of our Act East and their enhanced partnership for quality infrastructure. As far as healthcare is concerned, when I was there as ambassador, we did work out this agreement between the 2 countries. And I think now is the moment when, beyond geriatric care and beyond the greening of our hospitals or trauma care, in which the Japanese are very good, we need to look at how we can work even closer together on the pandemic. Skilling Indians is very important, as you know. And we have done it at both ends to get bigger bang for the buck by sending our people across to Japan under the technical intern training program, so to speak, and also training them in India under the Japan-India manufacturing centers. And I do believe that Japan's always had this China plus strategy, where India is looming large on the horizon beyond what they're traditionally comfortable with, which is parts of Southeast Asia. So let's encourage them to do more. In any case, they're the only country that signed such a civil nuclear deal with a non-NPT country such as India. So we were the first such country to have such a deal. I will now quickly move into my role as the third speaker. I do not have a great deal of time at my disposal because I want to try and end the whole thing in 1 hour and 15 minutes. So it's a race now. I am going to make a presentation on the Indo-Pacific. And in doing so, I would like to ensure that you have many of your questions answered. I see a lot of questions coming up on the Indo-Pacific, and I do hope that these will be answered through the presentation. Now, the oceans and the seas have always been extraordinarily important for us from the point of view of historical exploration, trade, colonization. The key point I want to make is that the Indo-Pacific itself is not a new concept. It has actually been created as a strategic space, a conjoint space by the colonial powers as well, several hundreds of years ago. They did move from one ocean to the other in a very strategic manner. And we've seen that running through the age of globalization as well. India's own maritime history is very ancient, goes back to the Indus Valley civilization. We are aware that even Alexander the Great, when he was coming down the Indus and wanted to leave, he had first, chosen the maritime route. Later, of course, he took the land route and did not make it home. But some of his generals did eventually go back by the maritime route. The Sanskrit word Navgat, in fact, is the route for navigation. So we must keep this in mind. And from India, we have seen a very pacific, movement of ideas, culture, even Islam to Southeast Asia by the maritime route. So we must keep this in mind. This slide will give you a broad idea of the trade routes that existed in the past. But by the way, they are the same trade routes that exist today. So this conjoint space that we are speaking of with the linking space in between the South China Sea, this broad space and spectrum has existed for a long time. A word here about China's presence. China thinks it is a very natural historical corollary for China to be present in the Indian Ocean, because 600 years ago, you had the epic voyages of Chinese explorer Cheng He, who went down to Hambantota, came up the Malabar coast, etc. But the point is that for 600 years thereafter, China has actually been virtually absent from the Indian Ocean, and therefore they are coming into the Indian Ocean today with their capacities in full view, but their intentions not quite so clear, is obviously a major disruptor. We don't see that presence the way a China apologist named Gavin Menzies saw it in his book 1421, the year that China discovered the world. Japan too, at the other end, deep end in the Pacific, actually was a closed society and relies on its supply chains and the sea lanes of communication for its own survival. And they opened up to the world under duress, of course, when Commodore Perry, signed an agreement with them. Thereafter, of course, they didn't look back as far as modernization and mimicking the West is concerned, in terms of not just industrialization, but also developing a modern navy. In that first phase after the opening up, in fact, a large number of the Japanese naval vessels were built in British, dockyards, and the French also built quite a few. They were competing to build Japanese ships. All colonial powers have had, an island development strategy, and to my mind, we see some of that today happening in the 21st century, as we see a neo-colonial approach, possibly by China, to the same region. So it's colonization of Madagascar, Seychelles, Mauritius, Sri Lanka, Hong Kong, Macau. These are examples, because these gave the colonial powers a perch in order to better exploit and link up with the bigger hinterland. This slide gives you an idea of China's development of ports and bases in the Indian Ocean region as part of their so-called string of pearls, or the island hopping strategy, which involves approaching various islands and smaller nations for OTR and other facilities, including bases, whether it is Gwadar, whether it is Salala, whether it is Djibouti, Hambantota. We've seen a lot of that. I want to introduce the concepts of mare liberum and mare clausum, because without that, you will not understand what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. And so we've seen this historically between Spain and Portugal in the 15th and 16th centuries, a kind of scrimmage again, jostling for monopolistic control over trade routes. Then they divided the earth between them, Portugal and Spain, into two equal hemispheres. And both had their own notions of closed seas, as in mare clausum, in which they would not allow others to come in and trade. And both also demanded, mare liberum in each other's space. So this goes back to the argument that Grotius had given on behalf of the Dutch East India Company, arguing that the sea, like the air, cannot be appropriated. The sea is international territory, and that every nation should be free to use it. This is reflected today in what we call the free and open, Indo-Pacific. we speak of freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight, freedom of trade. It goes back to this legal basis that exists for a few hundred years. This slide gives you an idea of how the oceans in the past were divided into various spheres. And this is something that we have to be concerned with when several nations today seek a certain kind of exceptionalism. There is obviously a jostling for deep sea fisheries, mineral resources, oil and gas extraction, and you can see the wealth that the Indo-Pacific is potentially capable of providing right next door to India in the central Indian Ocean, next to the Rodrigues Ridge, for instance. The International Seabed Authority has awarded vast acreage to different countries, including China and others. Whoever has the capability for deep seabed mining for polymetallic nodules and rare earths, etc., will be able to get to these faster than others. There are many disruptions taking place in this broad space. In the Indian Ocean, the rise of the US as the world's largest oil producer is actually a disruptor, because it makes not only the US less dependent on this part of the Indo-Pacific space, but also makes a country like India less dependent gradually. And we are still trying to tweak our offtake from Saudi Arabia and others in favor of possibly the United States, so as to rearrange the strategic space here. Terrorism, piracy, US is an exceptionalism that even a country like the US seeks, for instance, through its FONOPs, as you saw in the recent FONOP, Freedom of Navigation operation conducted by the USS Paul Jones in our exclusive economic zone. So that I can say that here the United States is seeking mare liberum. And you can contrast that with what's happening in the South China Sea, where the Chinese are trying to seek a mare clausum by closing up that space and creating their own unique artificial islands for geostrategic presence and contestation. In the Pacific also, there is a fair bit of jostling going on. More than anything else, that space, as you have pointed out, is of primary focus to 3 out of the 4 members of the Quad, because 3 out of the 4, that is the United States, Japan, and Australia, are primarily looking at it from a maritime point of view, whereas India is looking at it from the point of view of its continental concerns as well as maritime concerns. And India's primary focus will always remain, to my mind, on the Indian Ocean. With the given resources, we'll have to make the most of security, peace, and development in the Indian Ocean. Mohan had said long ago that whoever controls the Indian Ocean will dominate Asia, and the destiny of the world will be decided on its waters. For obvious reasons, you can see on this slide that so much of trade and other things, energy, etc., pass through along its slocks, and it is also home to some major choke points, which are there, obvious ones. And I'm not going to repeat each of these, but this again is crisscrossing all the slocks. So all the slocks theoretically can be choked. India, of course, is strategically located in this space. Its location in the IOR gives it a very special perch, and our own dependence on trade and energy through the seas is second to none. We have our own viewpoint, development of the blue economy, Sagar Mala, Mosam, all these, of course, are acronyms that students of international affairs are vastly familiar with. And we've also taken an initiative with regard to not just the IORA, but also IONS. Our EEZ is huge, but it's nothing compared to France's EEZ in the Indo-Pacific space. France has 7,000 troops in this region, about 3,900 in the Indian Ocean alone, and around 2,000, or 3,000 in the Pacific. As previous speaker, Ambassador Mohan Kumar pointed out, they have territories such as Clipperton Island, French Polynesia, and Wallis and Futuna in the Pacific Ocean, as they have Reunion Island and Mayotte in the Indian Ocean. Now, the Asia Pacific is a concept that has outlived its time. It was good for the second part of the 20th century when first Japan, thereafter the Asian tigers, and later China all rose economically because of the access provided to the great big one major market across the Pacific in the United States of America. But in the last 2 decades, we've seen that this growth and prosperity has spread across a much broader region. I've written about it for almost 2.5 years now, that the Indo-Pacific is a vastly more representative concept. It actually represents better the aspirations of the rest of the region, including South Asia, all the way up to East Africa. We have seen there are different forms of visions that have been, sort of put out by various countries, including France and Japan. The basic undercurrent that runs through all this is how to make the space more transparent, more predictable, how to reduce conflict, and how to make it a win-win situation for all. It is, of course, one of the largest regions of the world, and we have, as you can see, 50% of the global population resides in Asia, not to speak of the broader Indo-Pacific. We can see that there is an indivisibility of security and threats in the Indo-Pacific, whether it is terrorism, whether it is trade, whether it is climate change, whether it is pandemics. These two oceanic spaces are interlinked. There's no escaping from that. And a plethora of structures exist, but none, in my view, has proved to be that magic pill, that panacea, which will actually put an end to these difficulties that exist in terms of economic and security architecture. We have put out our own viewpoints, as you are aware, through the Prime Minister's speeches, both at Shangri-La in 2018 and at the EAS summit in Bangkok in 2019. And it revolves around a more inclusive concept. It does not really rule out anybody. But of course, the fly in the ointment here is that when countries speak, as the Quad does, of, say, a rules-based order, China, of course, does not accept that, because it tends to move in the direction of an international order based on international law, the United Nations and things like that. So there are differences here in terms of interpretation as to who makes these rules and what they mean to different people. The Quad is distinct, as you are aware, from the Indo-Pacific. And within the Quad, of course, today, apart from security issues, there is also a broader developmental agenda that is increasingly seen, whether it is climate change, whether it is critical technologies, whether it is supply chains. But at the root of all this, that undercurrent still is how to reduce dependency on a particular country, or how to ensure a broader security. I do feel that the Quad is likely to remain focused eventually on more security related issues, and it will have an exoskeleton through which it will connect on developmental issues. France is, like Australia and Japan, a strategic partner for us, and it is also, as you are aware, a member of the International Fusion Center of the Indian Ocean region that we host in Gurugram. Apart from the Quad members, France is also present right there. We have a number of agreements now in place with the United States, and there is a broad convergence that's developing between ourselves and the other 3 Quad countries. But the future, of course, will have to be debated. I think I'm running out of time, and therefore just a couple of more slides. Malabar has been expanded, as you know, on a one-time basis. Australia was invited last year. Japan was made a permanent participant into the Malabar in 2015. This means that the Quad also has a maritime version. I'm not saying the two are identical, they are not. And in the Quad Plus format, we are actually talking to a number of others. We were reminded by Ambassador Mohan Kumar that Israel should also be spoken to. In fact, the Quad has connected with Israel in the Quad Plus format, apart from Brazil, New Zealand, South Korea, and a few others. So the Quad Plus, of course, will continue to do that. And we can look at the future with anticipation. The Quad Summit, of course, has kind of determined its future, because it means that the dialogue has moved up very rapidly within 2 years from a DG level dialogue to not just a foreign minister level dialogue, but all the way up to the summit level. And I think there is agreement that every year they will meet at the summit level. By the way, none of the others that are today interested in this region, that is to say France, Germany, Netherlands, the EU as a whole, none of them are really extra-regional powers, nor is the United States, as you are aware. Britain, of course, is doing its own pivot to Asia, and this year is likely to send their Queen Elizabeth carrier battle group, which will move through the Indian Ocean all the way to Japan. Russia and China are the outliers, so to speak. Russia, in my view, is a Pacific power and should be treated as one. And the Eurasian landmass also has stakes in the Indo-Pacific space. Being continental, even landlocked or double landlocked, or being in the Eurasian landmass does not remove you totally from your interests in the broad Indo-Pacific. And I think the Indian way of looking at it as inclusive space is welcomed by some. Though China continues to look at this whole concept of the Indo-Pacific as being a kind of, fake competitor to the Indo-Pacific, to the Asia-Pacific concept in which it retains primacy. In the Indo-Pacific, there is a fade out for China in favor of others. It resents this as well. The Biden administration, if I could conclude with this slide, regards China as a strategic competitor. Just yesterday, President Biden has spoken of a commitment, a military commitment to the Indo-Pacific, not to create conflict, but to prevent conflict. And he has also spoken of regarding China as a strategic competitor. So I think the die is cast there. It's just that President Biden's style of doing this is going to be more collaborative. There'll be internal consultations, there'll be consultations with alliance partners across the Atlantic in the Indo-Pacific space. The United States has 37 different kinds of alliance partnerships around the world, not to speak of other lesser known lily pad arrangements for their military presence and activity. The one thing that has struck me is that the US, despite all that's going on in the Taiwan Strait, which is also part of the space of the Indo-Pacific, has not sent a carrier battle group through the Taiwan Strait since the USS Kitty Hawk's visit sailing through in a show of force in 2007. And so therefore, individual guided missile destroyers going through is not the same thing. And I think this needs to be studied a little more. I think, can conclude at this point, because really I'm running out of time. So let's just hope that things work out in the Indo-Pacific. I wish I had more time. So thank you for seeing those slides with patience. On another occasion, I will take a little more time to run through. Now, I have a question straight away for Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Mohan, your expertise on economic matters is well known, but this one relates to the India-France maritime partnership. So the question from Tanishq Saxena is, how will the India-France maritime partnership in the Indo-Pacific be perceived by China? And what do you think of the bilateral relations between France and China? And will the perception of the India-France partnership impact on the Quad or something to that effect? So would you like to take that first question and then I'll move to the others?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Sujan. The first maritime dialogue ever between France and India happened in 2016 at the level of Deputy National Security Advisor. Since then, we have had a second maritime dialogue. I participated in the first maritime dialogue, so I'm in a position to confirm that it was enormously useful. And that is when we realized suddenly that, oh my God, France is this huge maritime power in the Indian Ocean. And then we have now asked them that can we cooperate and can we get some information, etc., from their base in Reunion? They have a base in Djibouti, they have other areas, UAE, Saudi, etc. So that was the kind of conversation we had. Now, France is conscious of what China thinks, by the way. I mean, it's interesting that Kurt Campbell confirmed, and I hope I'm not revealing any secret, that South Korea was offered Quad membership, but politely turned it down. So this is a fact. Similarly, I suspect if Quad membership was offered to France, France may well turn it down. And that should give you enough of an answer as to the relationship between France and China. France has a very profound economic relationship with China. Having said that, I don't think I would put France-China relationship in the same basket as Germany-China relationship, for example, where I think Volkswagen, Siemens, and others, Mercedes-Benz and so on, have a profound interest. So I think France has that little wiggle room. France will not be too concerned about what China thinks of the maritime dialogue with India. France, I think, will not join the Quad because it will not want to be seen as overtly anti-Chinese and will want to keep that room for maneuver, that margin for maneuver. But other than that, I think France and India, we should not expect France to mouth the same statements about China that we are doing, because we have boots on the ground in Ladakh. We are the ones facing heat. They don't, and they have other important relationships at stake with China. Having said that, I would advocate all your students and others who are listening to this, do take a look at the French defense paper 2020. It's worth looking at on Indo-Pacific. It's a very, very good paper. It's 24 pages. It's well worth it because they spell out very clearly what is the issue with China, what is the US-China rivalry, and how France can position itself along with India and Australia. So it's quite a detailed statement that they have made. So that should answer at least most of your questions.
Yeah, while you are still with me, Mohan, there is a question from Samir Guduru. He wants you to comment on the fact that given the strength of the Indo-French partnership and nature of current relations between China and Australia, is the time ripe for emphasizing the France, Australia, India trilateral? And he thinks there are several other opportunities ranging from nuclear cooperation to green technologies, some of which you've already alluded to. So please kindly take that.
Not to take too much time, Sujan, thank you very much. Regardless of what China thinks, I actually think that should be the spoke. If you're thinking of the Indo-Pacific as a hub and spoke, the real spoke, if the hub is Quad, I think India, Australia, France can certainly be a trilateral relationship to look at the Indian Ocean. I hinted at that in my statement, and certainly I agree with the person asking the question that this could be a good trilateral for the Indian Ocean. Having said that, the real issue India will face in the Indian Ocean is with regard to trade and investment. Who's going to provide the fulcrum? How are you going to amplify this? Because, we are a 2.7 trillion economy. United States is 18, China is 14. So we have a problem. And that is the one problem that we need to be addressing. Other than that, I agree with the person asking the question. Certainly a trilateral between Australia, India, France is eminently suitable for the Indian Ocean area. Thank you.
But there's a lot of emphasis on connectivity and infrastructure. You are aware of that. So, Japan is focused on it. Australia is, the United States is. How about France in the Indo-Pacific? Because we don't hear much in terms of France's presence with regard to connectivity and infrastructure. And do you think that the Indo-Pacific concept as a whole is likely to play a very big role in how the RCEP evolves?
That's a very good question.
Dr. Abhijit has framed this question for me.
No, that's a very good question. Thank you, Sujan. No, I think he has a point because I also do not see the French investing very, very heavily in infrastructure. I mean, they may invest in infrastructure in individual countries where there is a French-speaking population of French nationals. But I do not see much by way of connectivity. That is true. But insofar as Indo-Pacific is concerned, I do believe we can count on France to contribute their might. I think we should. We should at least try to persuade them. It is Japan and France who can really contribute, at least with regard to the Indian Ocean area. We should try and persuade them. Thank you.
May I turn to our other speaker and ask her if she would like to chip in and comment on all that I said and all that Ambassador Mohan Kumar has said, because I'm sure you have a few more points to make. There isn't a specific question here with regard to Japan, but anything that you say about Japan, it being so important a country in the region, will add value to this conversation.
Thank you. It's interesting because essentially what happens when a person is looking on and studying Japan, we are essentially concentrated on understanding how India, Japan, ASEAN, China, Taiwan, etc., more across the East. Today's conversation brings to light that how the European circuit can have a strong influence on India with respect to both strategic and economic outplays. What I would like to add is more to do with the fact that, when we look at India-Japan relations, we talk a lot about how Japan is contributing to Indians' development, connectivity. We're looking at it moving from becoming economic partnership to strategic partnership. But I think what we need to put is our own house in order to be able to forge a strong technological-based relationship with Japan, in which I think the future of India-Japan relation would be pegged, that is the AI and the robotics, and with respect to critical technologies. In this respect, I think the fact that we stepped out from RCEP, which is definitely a concern in the East Asian circuit, we have what we come up with is the Atmanirbhar Yojana, and I think that is where we should totally try to see if we can synergize ourselves with respect to the needs and aspirations that Japan has on and puts on India. And this is why I feel that it is something that we probably missed the bus in the first round of production networking. I think the supply initiative, the resilient supply initiative that is being formulated with vaccine program, with India as the production hub, should become our basic key sector on which we again re-emerge into this production network system. I think that is one thing that I would like to point out. And of course, I think the Indo-Pacific is going to consume most of the next decade to come. So we would have to see how we evolve, and India being for the first time, I think, in a very strong position to make ourselves a bigger player in the international community. Thank you.
One more question for Ambassador Mohan Kumar, and then I want to turn to Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed to ask him if he would like to chip in and say a few words. Mohan, there is this question that the Antarctic and the Arctic are zones of contention today. One, of course, has a treaty; the other doesn't have a treaty. Now, India is working with the Nordics in order to see if it can do better in the Arctic. And a question that Pooja Krishna asks is, can India team up with France to do likewise in the Antarctic as a presence, establishing a presence there in tandem with them, since they are all over the place, as you're aware. They also have these islands, Tromelin and the scattered islands, and these are all part of their presence in the Antarctic.
So I think we should try. That's the best answer I can give. I'm not at all sure how the French would react to that, because I vaguely remember when I was ambassador that this issue came up just once. This tremendous politics governing who should participate, who should not. Russia, I think, is there already. And this has become, as the questioner suggests, this has become a bone of contention between countries. France will certainly help us wherever it can. I know they have done so in IORA, and we have tried to also help them out. I think they've done it in the Indian Ocean Commission, and we are trying to get them observership in IORA. So there is a history of France helping and we helping out France. So I think we will, if we ask for information, they will share, but I'm not sure whether that will get us to our ultimate goal of having a foot in the door.
Would you like to come in, chip in, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed? Because I see you on screen with your camera on.
Yes. Yes, I'm here as a sort of co-host because I'm a chair professor, and therefore I enjoy following all the sessions and I don't miss anything. What exactly would you like me to comment on?
No, in case you have anything to say, because you've been writing yourself on the Indo-Pacific, and I know what you write. And it's somewhat contrarian. Because I think you've been, let me provoke you in that case. You've been suggesting for a while now.
I write to provoke you,
I know.
But now you are provoking me.
No,
I don't want to rain on your parade. I am
no. But you have made the point frequently that the Quad will, kind of suggesting that the Quad will soon sink to the bottom of either the Pacific or the Indian Ocean, and that it's not really going to do well, etc.
Let me put it more, because you have put a question to me. Let me respond. I am a skeptic, both with regard to the concept of the Indo-Pacific and with regard to the mechanism of the Quad.
But didn't I convince you a while ago by telling you that the Indo-Pacific is a far more representative space, and that to keep insisting on the Asia-Pacific is actually being exclusive? It is,
I would say, the
to
opposite.
the point suggesting.
I belong to the earlier era where there was a Pacific Ocean and an Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean, to my mind, begins from Malacca and goes up to the Suez and the Persian Gulf. This is the Indian Ocean. This is India's strategic space. What we have done, and I think to our great disadvantage, we've allowed ourselves to be dragged into the strategically contested area of the Americans, and they have their own quarrels in that little space called South China Sea and East China Sea, and they are fully capable of looking after their interests. I cannot understand for the life of me why the Indian Navy has to cross Malacca and roam around in the South China Sea. Again, Indian Ocean rim, Indian Ocean, China's strategic interests and India's strategic interests are identical. We want a free movement.
Please elaborate. How so?
Yeah, I'm just saying. We want free movement of goods. We are dependent on this ocean. We depend on the energy flows. We are against piracy. I do not believe the Chinese have an agenda which is actively hostile. Also, do recall here.
But do you feel that bringing in a submarine to fight pirates in a skiff
is an Indian Ocean?
Policy?
You think that there is a legitimate role here for France and the United Kingdom and the United States? They have a legitimate role and China does not?
No, it is inevitable. I would say it is inevitable that China, as it grows, will spill over into not just South Asia,
do not know,
but the broader Indian Ocean space.
My own view is China has a legitimate interest in the free movement of goods and energy.
I agree with you.
Far more
than
the United Kingdom and France. Let's leave it at that. I think there are other sessions which will start shortly.
Certainly.
And
so,
let
yes,
the management, we will have other
Lawale, either asking me to wind up or perhaps wants to chip in. Go ahead.
No, so I just wanted to flag, we're running out of time and we have the next session lined up. I'm sure we could, organize another seminar and, we can get this discussion going. I really look forward to that. But I already have my next session lined up and the speakers are waiting. Yes. So I would request you to wrap up.
So thank you very much. My particular thanks to my good friend, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, and to Professor Srabani Roy Choudhury for having spared their valuable time to be our two speakers. And I want to also thank the organizers, Ms. Lawale and Symbiosis, Professor Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, for this invitation to all of us to be with you this afternoon. Please take care and wish you good health. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Srabani. Thank you, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Thank you, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy. And thank you, Ambassador Ahmed. And I look forward to more interactions with all of you. Thank you.